This is a session on next-gen project delivery, and I'm Mark Childerson from Gartner. We do supply chain visibility and collaboration software, and I'm going to be the facilitator for today. And first, I'm going to introduce myself, Don, and the participants, and then give you a brief overview of what we're doing for our talk, and then we're going to take it away with a conversation. So let me just introduce my colleagues here. There we go. What order are you guys in? Okay, to my left is my friend John Strickland, who is the principal of Collaborative Flow and is an expert on lean construction. Then there's Fernando Espanio, who presumably everybody here knows already, who is the president of ConstructX and is a master of AWP. And then James Chu, who is on the technical committee of the Project Production Institute, and we'll be talking about project production management. He will not have to say that 3 times fast, which is good, and nor will I. And then finally, Michael DeBroy from PTAG, who is an expert on collaborative contracting, and we'll be talking about that. Now, I'm going to be talking about why we need NextGen and what it is, and then each of my colleagues will be talking about one piece of the NextGen puzzle, and then we'll be elucidating that information further with conversation, answering questions from me and from you, the audience. I'll stop waving at that thing. So if you have questions, please scan that QR code and get on your phone. It'll be the Slido web app. You can enter questions there. I know Eventry is the web app for the app for the conference. There are reasons why we're using Slido, basically for scheduling. But anyway, you don't have to install a new app on your phone. It's just on the browser, so you can do that. And just ask for the questions. And Megan from Gartner, who's sitting over there, will pass them to me at points during the talk. Okay, so the first question is, why do we even need a NextGen? Like, we've been talking about AWP. Can we just implement that? Well, there's reasons. And the first reason is that there's going to be, over the next few years, next decade or so, a huge and ongoing increase in the amount of industrial project construction going on. There's a global energy transition happening. There's already breakout sessions in this conference about that, which means that a lot of existing assets are obsolete or will soon be obsolete, or will need major changes and major refurbishment, or simply going to need replacement. So there's a lot of work in the energy space going on and will be going on. And then also, of course, economic growth is spreading across the world. There's many developing countries which are, in fact, developing, and they need the same kind of energy infrastructure, plus a lot more classic infrastructure, airports, ports, roads, railways. Lots of work going on, lots of work to be done. So we have a lot of demand. And then the other challenge, another reason why we need NextGen, is productivity. Again, this is something we hear in conference after conference. Our industry is lagging manufacturing and productivity. Our productivity growth has been poor. It's been slow. It's been taking a long time. And that's true. And in many ways, that's a bad thing that we need to address. But it also, in many ways, is an opportunity that other industries, manufacturing, has been able to get these tremendous increases in productivity over decades, and we haven't. But that means that if we can adapt, not necessarily their methods, but that mindset and get onto that path of improving productivity, we could increase our productivity by 30, 50% more over the next decade or two. And imagine how many new projects would come on stream just because of that kind of cost reduction. It would be large. But now, lots of people say, never going to happen. Who could possibly believe that we could increase our productivity that way? But there are reasons to think that that's true. And the biggest reason, in my view, is that in our industry, we're dealing with so many players, right? Every project has a huge quilt of contractors, of vendors, of owners, of EPCs. The list goes on and on and on. And so a lot of the inefficiencies and problems we face in the construction space are communication and information problems, right? People don't know what to do. They don't know what the current situation is. They don't know the right thing to act on. And That causes us a lot of difficulties. Obviously, I'm in supply chain, I know. But that too is an opportunity because the technologies that have come out over the last 10, 20, 30, 50 years, so many of them have been centered around the digitalization, which is all about communication, finding new information, sharing new information. So in theory, and I believe in practice, if we can put those to proper use, we can achieve those kinds of productivity gains. But now, again, you might say, why haven't we already done so? And the reason why we haven't is because it takes a long time to figure these things out, right? We do a lot of work in the field. High-speed internet's a decade old. Mobile devices in the field are even less than that, ubiquitous mobile devices. It's pretty recent. And it takes a long time to put these new technologies into practice. So it's like in the early 20th century when electricity came out and they started bringing it into factories. And the first thing they did was take the original factory layout and replace those steam-powered machines or belt-driven machines with electrical machines. It's like, okay, fine. They didn't get huge productivity gains. It wasn't until people started to understand that, hey, wait a second, they don't have to organize the factory around the energy source. They can organize the factory around the workflow, around the processes. They can completely reorganize the factory. That took 20, 30 years, but then they achieved those gains. So with the new technologies, we're in the position to start achieving those gains and achieve those productivity benefits. So let's talk a little bit about what NextGen is, because I introduced these guys as, lean, AWP, PPI, blah, 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 and collaborative contracting. Well, in the 90s, it was very clear to everyone, or at least everyone paying attention, that this communication digital revolution was coming, right? It was clear that we were going to have devices in our pocket. It was clear that we were going to have high-speed internet. And the practitioners in construction, a lot of the thinkers, these guys on the stage and other people I think who are in the audience today, were taking that to heart and trying to figure out what to do, how to improve the industry. And a lot of the different thinkers went off in their own directions, on their own journeys of how to envision construction, how to envision industrial construction, and what to do with that, and how to apply the new digital capabilities to that. And so they went off on their journeys, and they came up each with their own unique perspectives. And so lean and AWP and project production management and collaborative contracting or integrated project delivery all kind of came out of that ferment and out of that journey outwards. And as I was starting to work with these guys in this plenary, I was reminded of the story of the blind man and the elephant. And it's a story, it's a folk story common in a lot of Asian cultures where a number of blind men come upon an elephant. Either it's brought to them or for some reason they're walking through the forest and they're asked to describe the elephant, right? And so one guy, I'll put that down too, one guy feels the leg of the elephant and says, well, an elephant is like a tree. Another guy feels the side of the elephant and says, well, an elephant is clearly like a wall, right? Another guy feels the tusk and says, an elephant is hard and thin and sharp. It's like a spear. Another guy feels the trunk. An elephant is like a snake. And yet one more guy feels the ear and says, oh, an elephant is clearly like a giant fan. And the purpose of that story, the moral of that story in the cultures where it's told, is that it's easy to get a hold of one piece of a problem, but then if you can see the whole thing together, you can develop a completely new understanding. Because obviously we all know that an elephant is not like any of those things. And so what we're really trying to do today is start the process of reintegrating those visions, those ways of looking at and understanding projects, and put them together. Each of the communities have a lot of similarity. They all think about things like collaboration and transparency and integration, so there is something to work them together. And what we're going to do is start today, and then continuing tomorrow in our NextGen, the deeper dive at 11:30 session. So if you have any questions that aren't answered today, we'll be answering them today, or tomorrow. That's important to remember. But we're starting to put those together, those pieces back together, so that we can really all start to see the true nature of the elephant. And as we work through these things, not only see that elephant, but be able to ride that elephant. And so the first speaker who's going to talk is John Strickland, who's going to talk about lean.
Well, I get the pointer and everything. Okay, this is the forward.
Green is forward, yeah.
Okay, great.
The big one's forward.
So, I'm here representing the lean way of thinking. As part of background, I have a construction operations background. I've also worked for very large engineering companies. And a lot of people think that lean is about commercial or hospital. Let me assure you, I've been doing it for 20-some years. I have never worked on a hospital. I have never worked on a commercial project. It's all been industrial and technology projects. So there are some applicable things. And one of the things, if we, like the elephant, if we asked everyone in the room, what is lean, we'd probably get 100 different answers. We'd get a lot of different things, so we kind of distill it up a level, and it's a way of thinking. So lean is philosophical in its nature, about way of thinking about how you respect people. And that's respecting mankind is not just being nice to people. It's about respecting how people work together to get things done. You know, how are people motivated? You know, how do people communicate with each other? And that is so we can create flow to the customer, so that we get things to them quickly and continuously do better. And the little slogan I've got there, I also think of lean as making sure that everybody really understands what's really going on about what's really important. And so you might think about that as reality management, what's really going on. And James is going to talk about that, I'm sure, more. And there's a little diagram there you see that's the lean triangle that goes back as far as the Lean Construction Institute goes. I remember Glenn Ballard presenting this at the first meeting I was at. But you have to have a blend of the organizational, how does the organization function? And we integrate that organization. We have to have commercial terms that don't prevent the organization from functioning. And we have to have a lean operating system that makes the workflow, or even go one step further, understands the production flow. And so it's a little odd. A couple of years ago, it would have seemed really crazy for folks from PPI and lean construction to be on this stage with Fernando at an AWP conference, because we had kind of gone different directions for some time. But I ran into Fernando a few years ago, and we started talking about, these things aren't mutually exclusive at all. And not long after that, I talked to James, one of his associates, and they could see the same thing. So we're here blending this, and a lot of this originated out of early work from the Lean Construction Institute. And you can see some of the big ideas up there that we had as we started. One of the very first ideas presented is what type of production system is construction, and the view of construction as a production process. And the last planner system was a big deal, and a big part of that was having 1 week's worth of work that was really ready before we released it to the field. Does that sound sort of like what you hear at an AWP conference? And then that went on ahead, and it wasn't very much longer that we started recognizing, well, how people are working together is a big deal, and the collaborative contracting, the network of commitments concepts, and the IPD concepts started evolving. Even more emphasis on respect for people, and lately takt time. But we went further from that, and so as very early in journey, another group came off and they said, hey, we really like these ideas about about having the work ready. And we would call that work-face planning. I think I started hearing about that again in the early 2000s, if not sooner. And so, Fernando, you want to take it from here and explain where we went from there?
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, we go way back, at least 20 years, actually, both of us on this panel. So the fact is, we look at work-face planning, and I know the history of it might get a little convoluted, and some people may argue the fact that where it started. But when we look at the last planner system that came out, and look-ahead planning and 1 week worth of assignments and all these good things, right? Work-face planning came out of that group, and really started. I want to say with some of the lean founders, right? When we go back to Glenn Ballard and Greg Howell and Iris Tomaline and Todd Zabel out of Strategic Project Solutions, right? Kind of formed this, with the concept of really bringing it across the industry. But and from there, things moved up into COA, and James reminded me of the fact that there is a COA publication that even says, work-face planning is coming out of the last planner system. Right, and that was written in 2013. You can go get it. Right, so there's a lot of credit back there. So if we look at the fact that yes, the last planner system kind of spawned a little ADB thinking. It maybe developed differently up in up in the Alberta oil sands, or how it developed differently here in the Gulf Coast. I think with Zachary starting it out and looking at a few things and the technologies that were in place, right, kind of really propagated it. So the fact is, yes, what do we have moving from the early days of work-based planning to the current thinking of advanced work packaging? And there's a lot of components in between all that, right? So well-defined production work structure, right? That's the beauty of, I believe, of advanced work packaging. Constraint management, even our lean folks say how great that is. Productivity and time on tool studies that really have proven it out. Alignment across function and disciplines, path of construction, all these things are great tools that drive better behaviors and we can get those benefits. And then now we're focused really on contracting strategies. There's a lot of digitalization, data transformation that's going on right now. You heard a lot about that today. That's where the future of ADP is heading. Systems alignment and readiness. We started hearing about system work package, turnover package alignment. Right, those are great things. And recently, of course, there's an ADP culture that comes out of this. How do we all promote things? So, we're still advancing our practice. So when we think of advanced work packaging, here I am talking to a bunch of people that are all about advanced work packaging. So why am I even talking about it? Right? Because we're heading a different direction. And those of you that know me, see that there's a place where we can go. How do we get here from today, our current practice, to where we can get to a better practice, even a great practice, right? And I think that's the amalgamation of all these different programs. So, again, let's understand what it is. The project framework to divide project scope into well-defined, logical, and manageable portions of work for planning and execution, right? That's kind of a key concept. So we start thinking about what we're really trying to do, improves project performance, productivity, and predictability, right? Absolutely, that's what we can do with advanced work packaging. What may not be so obvious is it incorporates agile and lean construction methodologies already. If we think about it, right? Agile, we're changing conditions all the time. We have to respond. ADP allows us to do that, right? And lean thinking is, hey, we define work. That's one of the key principles of lean, right? Define the work so we can go execute the work, how we plan to work and deliver something, right? So the fact is there are all these lean programs or components that are in there if we just want to look at it. And I think that's what we need to do. Why I'm sitting up here is let's look deeper into advanced work packaging and let's look deeper into lean and production management. And I know integrated project delivery is going to be a strong part of this. So the key thing, you heard this morning, is technology is coming our way in a big way, right? So we want to get empowered through that. And we want to optimize the capital project delivery process across the entire asset life cycle, right? We have great drawings, we have great processes, but we have to look at the project as a whole. And I think that's where we can bring these things together. And so that's our vision, at least the vision I see in terms of how we all came together to look at where do we take this next? How can we advance advanced work packaging in a way that's beneficial and leverages everybody on this stage, or the methodologies and the processes. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my other good friend, who I known since he was a doctorate student at UC Berkeley, coming out to my job, and looking at production management at the time. So we go back a ways and work together, and it's on some really great projects. So,
thanks, Fernando.
James, Dr. Chu, as I call him.
Thanks, Fernando. As Fernando just described, my journey personally actually began in about 97, 96. And my first topic was how to actually take work packages and use it in lean construction. So that's where I began. And as I matured, one of the things we saw a gap on is there's also organizations that's focusing on mindset. There are organizations, people of culture. However, one of the things that we started to see was a little bit of gap in further exploring what it meant to have a project as a production system. Okay? So in order to understand project as a production system, not only do you need to understand how can you characterize a project as a production system, but also what are some of the sciences behind how do you optimize and control a production system. So that's where we started to focus on. So you can actually see that idea spawned out a bunch of stuff, and one of the terms that a lot of people are now familiar with is the terminology called operations science. And operations science is nothing more than science that describes a behavior of a production system. Now, what's interesting is we use exactly the same science to help manufacturing companies improve their bottom line. Okay? So it's not only something that applies to project world, but also manufacturing environment, as well as anything that's applied to associated with supply chain. So what does it mean to actually look at project as a production system? Now, as you all are very familiar with, every project that we deal with has a schedule. Okay? And schedule could be in your Primavera, it could be in Microsoft Project, or our most beloved scheduling system, Excel. Okay? Regardless of what form it's in, it tells us who needs to do what by when. Okay? Whether it's actually a single package, multiple package, single organization, multiple organization, it tries to achieve the same thing. But what it doesn't do is to look at what is the underlying people, equipment, space that are going to actually do the work. As I just said this morning in the intro to PPM, there are people that spend months developing level 1 schedule, level 2 schedule, level 3 schedule, up to level 8 schedule I've seen, hope to get control over the actual production system. But the reality of the situation is, how you actually have labor organized, equipment organized, and space organized will determine whether something gets done or not. And when I say labor, I'm including engineers and everybody else in the bucket. Okay? Now, is this a new idea? No, not at all. So if you actually look at something that John Fondel, those of you that are familiar with CPM might recognize his name. He's known as the father of CPM to the industry. And he said, because every project at some point is resource restrained, that's the word he used. The actual concept of critical path fails, and the concept of float actually fails. And those of you that's been involved in project for at least a few years will get to see that, right? Because one of the things that we thought was not the critical becomes critical because of labor issues or actually space issues or equipment issues. So how do we actually get a hold of this thing? How do we actually handle this problem, he called it? And we said, let's actually look at it from this perspective. Again, project is a production system. From a production system perspective, we can actually look at it using what we call 4-5-3. Stepping away, again, we're not saying it's not needed, stepping a little bit away from project administration efforts, and we're going to focus on project production. Focus on how people design stuff, how people make stuff, how people deliver stuff, transport stuff, and how people build stuff, including commissioning. And we said, there are things that govern how this system behaves, what we make, product, how we make, the capacity, labor, equipment, space that does the work, and inventory, things being worked on, waiting to be worked on, called inventory. And last but not least, variability. Not to be confused with uncertainty. And if you want to talk more about variability, come and find us, and we can talk about that. Now, the good news is you don't actually have to take 5 levers and try to do a trial and error. Because what we just referred to, operation science, actually has the formulas that help you optimize before you even begin a journey into your projects. So what are we doing with it? We're taking map and model it, a production system, simulate, analyze, and optimize a production system. And then once you have the system designed the way you want it to behave, then you're controlling it through the project using production control. Okay, so that's, you can actually say, the gamut of what we're actually working on. How is it relevant to AWP? Number one, AWP is all about the packages that are flowing through the project, whether it's in engineering phase, transportation, fabrication, transportation, installation. So the operations science and viewing project as production system allows to answer the specific questions. What is the optimal size? Where should these be done? Should we actually fabricate pipes on-site, off-site? How much is the right capacity to have to actually produce your engineering? So these are the questions that we've been answering using operations science. However, one of the things that we are focused on is exposing, unlocking the value, right? However, there's one more thing that might actually need to come in place to be able to capture that value. And in order for actually us to help us capture that value, we're now going to turn it over to Michael to talk about integrated contracting.
Thanks, James. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about integrated project delivery for industrial projects. similar to IPD, to the commercial world, the institutional world, similar to alliancing. Integrated project delivery for industrial projects is a merger of those principles that underline those two methods and the way we take these large industrial projects and put the terms and conditions in place based on typical EPC contracts. And I'm going to get into that. Another way to look at integrated delivery for industrial projects based on the discussion up here today is it creates the business framework, it creates the organizational framework, it creates the commercial framework. It allows the parties to create the cultural framework for these methods to be implemented on a large project. Most people here are either investigating or are using AWP. Some of you are using on your AWP projects, a little bit of lean here and there. I bet you less than one, if any, are using AWP, lean, and PPM. And there's no reason in the conversations we've had for the last year and a half that you shouldn't be. And as a matter of fact, this group came together because we have a large SMR project that has picked collaborative contracting as the way to go, and they got a big problem. They got to bring the cost of their first unit, commercial, down from 10 million a constructed megawatt to the time they get to their fourth or fifth one, down to about 3 million a constructed megawatt. That's a huge challenge. If they don't do that, they won't be commercially viable, and the SMR promise for the nuclear world and for all of us that want to have a great, bright, clean future is going to be a hard trudge. So integrated project delivery brings all of that together. It creates that framework. It's based on 9 principles. It comes out of IPD, comes out of alliancing, and it puts them together. It's based on 2 years' worth of research to answer the simple question. Why do industrial projects start back in 2015? Why are we not using IPD? Why are we not using alliancing? Why are we not using a lot of the lean methods? So we struck a research project. A whole bunch of folks that are companies who are in this room. We got together. John was on that, representing his company, and we started asking ourselves questions. And what we figured out, the reason we're not using them is we're different as an industry than the commercial and the ICI and the institutional space. We have both design optimization requirements, significant design optimization requirements, otherwise the plant doesn't do what you want it to do, and we have massive construction risk. So we have to bring those things together. And, you know, out of the research, one day the academics, the 4 academics we had on the project came to us and showed us this data graph and said, if you do these things based on 85 projects, your project won't fail. And that started the journey down to what we're talking about is integrated project delivery for industrial projects. Let's go to the next slide. So the 9 principles come together, 5 out of what we call commercial IPD and 4 out of alliancing. And really, it's bringing them together. And those principles are supported by 23 different methods. And those methods are what we're up here talking about today. More than half of these principles in there, I've highlighted a few, are lean principles, advanced work packaging, and PPM. And you know what, as you've heard us move all the way through, this all started coming out of lean and went its separate ways. And now we're sitting on the stage here saying it needs to come back together because of the technology, because of the recognition of opportunities for data integration and getting that foundation right so that we can catch up with the aerospace industries, with the automotive industries, with the pharmaceutical industries, and the way they conduct products. We have a chance of doing that. And we think by bringing this next-gen set of methods together and investing in them, and in the context of collaborative contracting and whatever flavor fits your particular stakeholders in your project, we as an industry are going to be much better off, and you as a project leader and a business owner of that project are going to be much better off. This slide here represents a particular project in terms of how they chose to put the 9 principles together and when to use them at what phases with those 23 methods and at what level of intensity. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mark,
John, actually.
and we're going to get to the question and answer period.
We got one more, right? Kind of, let's wrap this, back up here. Wrap this one more thing about how, you've heard us all talking about how this launched out of lean construction with actually the founders of lean construction launching Project Production Institute. This all, and launching the whole IPD movement. So this all had common origins. And this is about pulling this stuff all back together and learning from each other and reassembling so we can take what we've learned as we've gone off onto our various areas of specialty and making a project. One of the clear things that comes out of this is it's not a contracting operation. So we have to understand how the work gets done. And one of the prime lessons out of lean construction very early on is you can't run the project by managing contracts. And so this is getting the people involved in what's really going on and really understanding that and combining all of these ideas. And the idea is we're wanting people to understand these concepts so we develop a better understanding. As we better understand how all this fits together, we'll create better leaders. Those better leaders will build on this and do better projects. We're just trying to get this fire started. And so with that, I think we'll have a chance for some questions.
Okay, so again, scan that QR code, enter your questions on Slido. I've got a few to start us off, but Megan will hand them to me as they come in. So, John, you talked about the last planner system, having that 1 week of unconstrained work, and obviously that's same as, or very similar to AWP and the work-phase planning. But John, you also talked about lean being about what's really going on. And what's really going on is that not all of your IWPs will be unconstrained at the time they get to the last planner. And I mean, lean obviously comes from manufacturing where you can hit the red button and stop the line. How do we create an environment for our last planner to feel that they can hit the button and stop the line? What do we need to do to create it so that if something happens and they can't actually execute a constraint-free IWP, they don't let it go out with constraints?
Yeah, you're matching, is my mic on here?
Yeah.
So the greatest concept is about commitment-based. That's part of where commitment-based management comes in. We don't ask them to go do things. They make commitments to go do work based on having the constraints removed. And we have the operations science to help us know when to go do that. So you have to have the culture of not demanding people do work that can't yet be done. There's a very important shielding concept that starts from the day one of last planner, is that you shield that group. And so the other thing that evolved into is where look-ahead planning came from. Because as you said, the original goal was we would never put work on the work plan that we hadn't removed all the constraints a week ahead. And that lasted for about a week and a half. We recognized that we couldn't do that. We surely couldn't do that if we didn't improve the look-ahead planning. So that's where the look-ahead planning went off to. And then the other key thing is making sure that people know what they really need to be worked on. And a key concept is I can make a very reliable promise to go do something, but it means nothing if no one's going to use it when I get done. So you have to understand not only what I'm promising to do, but who's going to use it next. And so you're building that network of people who are moving the work through the system.
Yeah. So John, if I can add something to that.
I would hope you do.
Yeah. So we heard this morning, Kevin McNally talked about the red and the green, right? So the schedule probably said, hey, I got to go this direction, lit up the model, and nothing was ready. No work fronts were ready. So I have to rapidly replan. So the lean concept here is that, hey, okay, we discovered a constraint problem that didn't quite make it. We're not aligned with the engineering, we're not aligned with material, whatever it was, right? That was a symptom of a bigger problem. And when we look at the last planner system, right? It's looking at, well, how do we get deliverables reliably released in a way so people can do, we can hand things off. So, you know, applying Last Planner into the engineering world, right, it's unheard of in our industry, right? How do we do that? And, you know, but the fact is it's happening in hospitals, it's happening in all sorts of things, technology, right? People are engaging engineers and applying the Last Planner methodology at the engineering level. And of course, out in the field, you know, we have to make better decisions, and we can apply Last Planner, you know, and those methodologies, you know, in our weekly work plans to get really robust 4-week look-aheads, right? So what are we going to do? Everybody understands their role, and we're getting really good at that part, right? But the fact is there's so many opportunities here to drive this alignment that we heard with Walid and CCC, that, you know, it's alignment, and that has to do a lot with constraint management, which actually is a huge opportunity for Last Planner to remove those individual constraints.
Yeah, I'll make one more clarification. That you can't manage the project by managing contracts. So the next place they learned, after we wanted the weekly work plan to be free of restraints, we had to have look-ahead planning. Pretty quickly, we recognized that would be a lot easier if our contracts weren't forcing us into silos that drove people apart. And that's what led us into the IPD world. And at the same time, James and his group was recognizing, but you may not working on the right things at the right time, or are really understanding your capacity. So that is how you have to understand all of this, you know, to make the whole system work. And you comment on that, James, or?
Yeah, so one thing that we want to remember is very early on, we didn't really actually call it a look at planning. Remember that?
Okay.
It used to be called make ready.
Yeah.
And that was make the packages ready for the execution on site. Now the question became, how much work should we actually have ready? Because the more work we have ready, that meant our capital efficiency started to actually go down. Now, if you try to optimize just for the sake of site, what about transportation? What about fabrication? What about engineering, right? So one of the things that we started to actually look at is what is the overall, I use the lean term, value stream that needs to be optimized? Because at the end of the day, when you get to the site, what we're experiencing is exactly what's expected for us to experience based on the system that we designed. So the question was, how do we actually design a system so that we don't run into a situation where we're constantly actually having to deal with the reality of day-to-day variability? Can we design those out at the beginning? And that's how we actually started to talk.
Yeah, so think of this. The challenge the question was, how do we prevent installation work packages from going out into the field before we're ready, right? And we've got AWP at the table, we've got Lean at the table, we've got PPM at the table, but how many of us are using just one of those methods? And by doing it within in a construct, a framework where you get to choose all the methods that make sense, introduced on a phased approach, and bring all your partners in early. I mean, what was in CII, we say for every dollar we spend in planning, we get $6 to $25 out the other end. If we take these methods and we bring our constructors in to talk about how we're going to break the work up, while the engineers are in the room, while the major OEMs are in the room, while the methods folks are in the room, and Kevin, wherever you are, I'll hug you. While the data sciences are in the room, these are big projects. They're multi-billion-dollar projects. We expect to run them on the back of a napkin. Give me a break, right? So the ability to do that, the ability to invest in that, is by having the right delivery method. I don't want to say contracting strategy, but delivery method that takes away the barriers so that to the minimal point possible, an installation work package never gets let out. And if we're doing it at that end, if they were involved in the beginning, they know that they're empowered to say, nope, 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 next work package. Because they're doing the 1 week look aheads, the 2 week look aheads, the 6 week look aheads, or the 14 week look aheads, depending on your industry.
Okay, so we're talking about contracting. Michael, you've been talking about contracting, and John's been saying you can't manage a contract or a project through the contracts. So we've all been involved in, we've all been involved in contracts where you have your commercial terms, you plan out what you're going to do, and then the contracting process is a challenging one, let's say. Does this mean that we need lawyers who are trained in construction? Do we need to simply put the contract in a box when it's written and never open that box? Do we need to ignore it? How do we put that into practice?
So, yes to your first question. You need lawyers that can translate the business will, the work will, the methods will into language. So yes, you need trained lawyers. But you need lawyers that are not trained in win-lose, which is how most of them are trained. You need lawyers that are trained in putting together win-win documents. And the win is if the project wins, we all win. So you need lawyers trained on that. And the exercise isn't to come out with the agreement. The agreement at the end of the day is just a summary of how you've chosen to work together, how you've chosen to incent each other, how you've chosen to make equitable decisions. And it is an expression of the learning, the training that Kevin talked about this morning, that the planning group, with the people that are going to construct in the room and commission in the room, go through. And that becomes, you put it aside. If you're managing an I2PD contract or project through the contract, you've failed. So the contract is an expression of what you've agreed to do. It gets put away. And because you've done you've selected your partners and the owner for behavior, and you've trained them on behavior, and you've trained them on value, people work together. People want to be successful on projects. And when you get it right, Amy's in the room. So Amy and I are on an I2PD project together, and it is amazing to see in the beginning when they all come into the room and we won, we're not sure what we won, and then somewhere in that validation process, the trust happens and the lights go on, and they go from being like this and individuals to all leaning in on planning the work and how we're going to do the work and when we're going to do the work and where we're going to do the work. So.
Yeah, so I'll add another thing on the contracts question. I mean, we have to look at what is reality today and what the practice is today. And yes, contracts are important in the reality of our world. And in there, and we've heard it before, we need to put in the requirements for participating in the type of job we want, whether it's IPD, whether it's, ADP requirements, data requirements, all these things have to get in there because it's going to level set the expectations of what we're going to experience on a project. And the fact is, yes, not everybody on board that's going to come on board is going to say, my AWP is better than your AWP, or you won't enforce that, right? Or data, or whatever it might be, right? Unfortunately, we're in the paint. Maybe years from now we'll be a little different, but we need to have those ground rules aligned. And we need to be able to train to those ground rules, make sure people understand what they're signing up for. And yes, a lot of times we can just put that away and we can not refer to it because the team has advanced enough where they know how to work together. But it is a reality, but it is based on, I think we have to understand that there is a certain amount of requirements that we need to share across our supply chain, right, to get them aligned to what we want to do because it's so complex. There's so many players. And anybody that can throw a rock into the system and it could fall apart. But you have to have the means to say, okay, let's level set, not to throw a hammer at people and get the lawyers out. I agree with you. We need to have them set the business rules. But the fact is, let's get everybody working off the same page of music and through these requirements and what we expect an ADP program to look like, a lean portion of that program, in feed, during detail design, during engineering, whatever that might be, and through construction and turnover. How do we want this team to really work together, right? We've got to have a little bit of a roadmap on how that's going to happen.
Yeah, I thought there might be a simpler answer. The answer is about putting the contract in the box. No, put the lawyers in the box. Okay. No, that's a little wisdom. But that is the key point of we'll talk a lot about transactional contracts and relational contracts. And the big difference is transactional contracts make the assumption you can predict what's going to happen in the future and address all of your remedies. Relational contractors say, no, that's futile. We can't do that. We're going to agree about how we're going to work together to solve whatever problems come up. And so, Michael hit it perfect. You need to have the lawyers who are built there to build consensus not to drive advocacy for an individual position. And it's a fundamentally different mindset. James, or anything you've got the chair on contracts?
Yeah, so one thing, there are moments in time where through my learning, there was been critical questions that someone's asked. And I said, why didn't I think of that, right? And this is one story about contract. Well, at one of the PPI symposiums, someone actually raised a hand, and the speaker happened to be a professor at UC Berkeley that consults to Amazon for their distribution center designs and so forth. So he knows how to deal with massive logistics and organizations. And someone actually raised a hand and said, what is the right form of contract to implement PPM? And he said, before we answer that question, let's ask the question, how do you want your production system to behave? Assume you own all your supply network. Think about how you want that behaving. Now that you don't own everything, think about what kind of contract you need in place to make it behave the way you want it to behave. If you haven't answered the first question, then I can't really tell you whether your contract works for you or not.
That's really good.
If you actually had heard about Lyle Goldratt, anyone here familiar with critical chain, Goldratt, right? He actually has a very famous quote. What did he say? He said, tell me how you will reorder me, I'll tell you how I will behave. So one of the things that we have experience on, we actually said, we got to go lean, make it flow. At the same time, we said, we're going to be paying for piecemeal work. Those type of two things don't actually align. So we got to do one or the other. Okay? So I think the first question is, how do we want our system to behave? And then, as you said, it's a configuration. We do not want a single form of contract with everybody. People that provide commodity versus people that provide technology, people that provide capacity versus people buy the product should have different form of agreement because we want them to behave differently as someone that's involved in projects.
That's a great point. We those of you that maybe attended some of these other conferences, there's always this term contracting quilt, right? So the contract between just the owner and an EPC or an owner, an engineer, or a contractor, is just one layer of the contracts. And those generate more down to the supply chain. And are those aligned? So James bringing a big point. If I really want to accomplish this, but I signed a contract that I want you to deliver all those valves all at once because that's the cheapest price, what kind of disruption is that going to be? That's just a total misalignment about what we're trying to do and get that flow. So a little bit.
Okay, I've got a question for the audience here, which is a good one. Let's assume people in this room have bought in. They think, okay, these guys know what they're talking about. Let's do this. So how in practice do we put that together? And I don't mean what does a project that implements all the elements look like. That's actually relatively clear in my mind. But we're talking about, okay, if we want to implement AWP in our project, we get you, Fernando, or some of the other people in the room to sort of tell us the AWP plan. If we want lean, we get John, whatever. Do we get people, practitioners in each area to map out an overall plan? Is that the way that works in practice? How does that actually happen on your project?
I think Michael's covering that.
Yeah, so let's assume, to answer your question, we all agree on the scope, right? And you've all been invited to this project, and you know what your scope is based before contracts are let. But you've all been invited in as early supplier engagement, and you know the scope, and you know what your role is, and there's no competition. You're all unique in terms of providing your service. That's the first step to get that agreement. And then and oh, by the way, we've agreed it's going to be collaborative contracting. So it's going to be best for project, and if it's best for project, it's going to be best for me. If the project wins, I win. So you've got to buy into that concept. And it starts with the owners, but all the parties have to buy into that concept. And then you begin the process of saying, on my project, with my group of suppliers, which of these methods make sense? There's 23 of them. There's actually more than 23, but these are the 23. And we started out with 20, and we keep adding them as we go. But these 23 methods, you don't necessarily need to use them all to have a successful project, but you need to use enough of them. What the research showed us is just using one or two of these methods, you might be successful, but your probability of success is no greater than if somebody does it just traditionally. It's random success. But if you use enough of these methods that are purpose fit, and we're all at the table conversing here, purpose fit to your project, and then once you pick those methods, because we think these methods, and I'm advocating for the nuclear world that it's many of the methods, but including AWP, Lean, and PPM, and that's a whole conversation if somebody wants that. Once you've picked your methods, then you begin to break the project down the way we would traditionally. And you heard Kevin talk. He did a great job talking about you got to train everybody, you got to bring everybody to a common understanding of these methods. You've got to decide how you're going to begin to break the scope up and which method you're going to use for that. You're going to have to decide how you're going to control the project. You have to decide how you're going to take a look at it from a production project management. If you really want a really good example of how that works, go take a look and see what Elon Musk has done inside of his factories. So it starts with picking your contracting strategy once you and your partners have understood the scope and you brought them in early. Because there isn't one of us, there isn't a single organization at this table where we have all the answers. But collectively, we have more of the answers together than we do individually.
Yeah,
Let me add.
what?
Okay, I'll add to this. I mean, clearly there's different ways of getting involved. Education, training. When you just incremental improvement is all you want, then just get better at what you're doing. If you want a step change, right, you're going to have to look differently. You have to think differently, right? So when we want to go from 10 million a megawatt to 3 million a megawatt, that's a different problem to solve, right? And we have to look outside to different processes as to how do we achieve that. ADP is a great step. Lean's going to add another. Project production management is going to do some other things. We need people to come together. So IPD, is necessary. It's necessary at that level. But yes, you need to become aware of what's available and have that mix of things. We formed the ADP plus Lean Joint Working Group, right? Basically to explore this deeper and look at applications of where we could do this, right? It's not rocket science, right? It's understanding what the other things are doing and trying to leave behind that doesn't work on my projects. It's what part of that makes sense to me. So if you're going to go out, hey, there's a lot of Lean conferences, PPIs, we've got the symposiums, and we can learn about how to apply that. But it does take a different set of specialists, right, to do this. But we have to embrace the fact that if we're going to change, we can't all do it on our own, right? Even all of us up here will say we love to learn, right? We're learning all the time. That joint working group is just producing a lot of things, and we introduced, we talked about, I think Keith's out here, the big rooms, target value delivery, project production systems, right? We have those webinars, we have those discussions, bi-weekly to share amongst things and share ideas, right? Anybody can be part of it, right? But it's yours, and those that really, people that want to really make a difference, understand it, how they can apply it, start thinking about that way.
The one thing I'd hit at the very end about the question was how do you get started? The two critical ingredients are you have to have someone on the project team that understands the vision and is guiding that. Usually as part of the executive leadership team, there's a small group of folks who get this, who are on the project, who are leading it, and those people need shielding from the executives. Someone talked about you guys make big bets. This actually isn't as big a bet as you think. But it's going to seem like a big bet, so you need the executive shielding to let this team go do something different than the traditional way.
Okay, good. And I think I'm going to wrap up with one more question before we have our deeper dive session tomorrow at 11:30. Or, having seen these guys in action, it's pretty apparent that if you meet any or all of us at the bar this evening, you'll probably get some good wisdom there as well. So the question is, it's kind of multi-part. What does next generation procurement look like? And that breaks down to a number of things. Firstly, how do you select vendors? Secondly, are vendors inside, or which vendors are inside the collaborative contracting tent and which vendors are outside of the collaborative contracting tent? And how do you integrate vendors into a production system, bearing in mind the reality check of lean, that schedules are always changing as we go along.
Can I?
Go ahead, James.
So one thing that we have experienced working with certain organizations who are, I think, leading edge on the supply chain is they always look at supply chain void of a project. What I mean by that is typically when we think about procurement, we think about a project and we determine what it is that we actually need, and then we actually look for contracts or providers that can actually supply it, and then we're in the procurement phase. A lot of companies that are in the business of manufacturing, like oil and gas, data centers, they have a supply chain team that's constantly monitoring the situation of the supply network. And it's the taking those piece of puzzles and then putting it together to actually produce the next generation of projects. So we actually had owners that are more familiar with the actual cost of commodities that the manufacturers use than the manufacturers themselves. Now, is that something that everybody here will do or can do? Maybe not. But it's actually one of the things that we need to think about is separating out procurement for a project and understand the supply chain management and how the project is the many-to-many relationship. I think that's one of the next gen procurement.
Yeah, I think if we go back to what we're really trying to accomplish, especially in AWP, I really say, well, IWPs, when we hand something to a foreman, we want them to execute that IDP, whether it's 3 days or 8 days of work to complete it. But along with that comes materials, right? We talk about, give that team the right materials at the right time, at the right place, deliver that. And how are we doing that today, right? And then if that is working for you, what's right behind, where's all that material coming from? Is it coming out of a huge staging area that someone's spending months looking for it? Or do you have some kind of managed inventory, supply chain, logistics delivery program in place that delivers things at the right time? And if you got that, then how are your contracts aligned to deliver that? This is where the agile part comes in, right? This is where lean concepts start coming in. So how do I want to, build this concept of procurement work package, by aligning the POs that are associated with these work packages and their delivery requirements and flexibility when things change, right? Or we have to respond to the fact that the supply chain isn't as responsive anymore because there's such huge demands. How am I gonna, if I have a problem, how am I gonna modify that? Am I gonna go to more of a prefabrication strategy? Am I going to more of a modular strategy? Am I gonna have to be stuck with other things, right, that may not be as productive, but that's what gets the project done, right? So all these things have to be thought of in procurement to come out with a production system that's going to work for, I believe, the project itself. So yeah, it starts out, hey, I've got to align what I'm trying to really do at the end of the day, get everything reliable. And how does that work all the way from the end in mind all the way to the beginning? And that means how my contracts and how's my procurement, my supply chain need to respond, and what's got to go into that, and what flexibility. And we have to move away from this low price mentality to a value-driven one that says, hey, at the end of the day, I get all this value if I give people what they want when they want it. So my procurement process needs to support that. And that may mean I might be buying the most expensive bolts ever. But you know what? I'm getting 30 times that back, in the production side of it.
Okay. All right, well, I think everyone's had a good sample and a good start. I'd like to point out that there's 2 QR codes on the current slide. The littler one is a source to download lean and AWP papers that are relating to what we're talking about. And we hope to see a bunch of you tomorrow morning as well for the deeper dive. Okay, thank you very much.
Bill?